Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a video and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Today, I'm privileged and delighted to welcome a very accomplished historian, writer, and editor from the US, Marshall Tilbrook Poe. Marshall, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Marshall is the founder of New Books Network. As I mentioned, he's a historian with a focus on Russia. He's a writer, he's an editor. He's taught at the Harvard University and several other prestigious institutions. So Marshall, tell me, what would you say are three key milestones in your career or your life?
That's actually pretty easy in my case.
Okay.
The very first one was meeting a professor as an undergraduate at Cornell College. It's a small college in Iowa. I'm originally from Kansas, and this is a sort of flyover territory in the United States, but I was fortunate enough to get a position at Cornell College, and I met a man named Dan Kaiser. And I thought that he was just simply a remarkable individual, and I really wanted to be him. And he was the first such person I had ever met. And I just kind of fell in love with him.
Okay.
And he was a Russian historian, so I became a Russian historian.
Okay.
The second milestone might be a little bit unusual, although sadly it's not very unusual, is that I am an alcoholic. And I come from a long line of people who have substance abuse problems. And when I was about 40, I understood that it was time for me to stop drinking. And so I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and very luckily, my last drink occurred the day before my first meeting of AA, and I've been sober now for 15 years. And I have to tell everybody who has these kinds of problems that there are lots and lots of support out there for people who have substance abuse problems. And I owe a lot to AA, and they really taught me how to be an adult. I won't go too deeply into that, but I'm very grateful for them. I say the third milestone was when I finally got the opportunity to do something I always wanted to do, and that was start a company.
Okay.
I studied Russia, and I spent some time in the Soviet Union, and one of the things I realized there is that you can't do that in the Soviet Union. You can't just make something that solves somebody's problem. And so I saw that with the New Books Network, which started out as a hobby, that I might be able to do this. So I sort of threw caution to the wind. I was a professor at the time and quit my professor job and devoted full time to the New Books Network. I'd say those are the three.
Wow. And when were you in Moscow or Russia?
I first went to Moscow in 1984, and then I went back a bunch of times. So I saw the entire transformation. I was actually in Russia when the old regime fell. I saw the flag come down off of the Kremlin. I had a lot of very interesting and good experiences there.
So, a little bit of trivia. I think you and I were probably overlapping a lot in Russia. I used to work for British American Tobacco, and we had a large office there. So I was also there when the flag came down.
Yeah. It was a very interesting time.
Absolutely. So Marshall, now let's move on to your New Books Network, which you said was the organization you founded. Tell me about this venture.
Well, it started as a hobby. I was always very interested in a problem. And the problem is that there are a lot of very smart, well-intentioned, public-spirited people. They're usually professors, but not always, who write really interesting books. These books have wisdom in them and a lot of knowledge. There are things to learn from them. But I realized that they were not getting to the public very well. And that is because the means of distribution of these books is somewhat hobbled. And it's not really the fault of the people that publish them, university presses, because they have very limited resources. So I was looking for ways to get the sorts of things that professors and other serious nonfiction writers write into the public sphere. And I did a bunch of experiments. This was only one, the others failed. And I started a podcast called New Books in History in 2007.
That must be
and I just wanted to see I just wanted to see if people would listen, and they did. And so then it kind of dawned on me that I had created one institution, the format of which could be used over a lot of different disciplines.
Okay.
And then it grew organically. So we started with New Books in History, then we had New Books in Philosophy, then we had New Books in East Asian Studies, then we had New Books in Hinduism, then we had New Books in Japanese Studies. And so the network just grew organically like that.
And when you say you had new books, what are you doing with these books? I mean, these are published books that you're reading out.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially the way we work is we engage hosts, almost all of whom are professors. There are about 450 of them now, who are very interested in their disciplines. Say they're Russian historians, they're only interested in Russian history.
Correct.
So what they do is reach out to their colleagues and interview them about their new books. And then we do all of the post-processing, post-production, publication, and publicity. And so what this essentially does is give them a platform.
Okay.
And they enjoy it very much. It's kind of crowdsourced in a way, if you think about it.
It's fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah. And they pick the books they cover, I should say. We don't do that. So if you're an expert in Russian history, you pick the books, not me.
Very interesting. And you said you publish 60 interviews a week with over 1 million downloads. Now, that's a very, very large amount of downloads that are happening. So tell me, what really went into creating a network like this, and what were some of your challenges?
Well, it was a slow, organic process. We did not start with any capital. In fact, for 10 years, I supported it myself. The internet has incredible economies for people like me. The hosting costs are low, the production costs are low, distribution costs are low. So I could run it myself for 10 years. And essentially, it was just a process of people coming to me saying, I would like to host a podcast channel called New Books in African American Studies. And I say to them, okay, I'll do that. You do the interviews, I'll do everything else. And it was a slow process of accretion on the content side. That is, more and more people would contact me saying, I want to do this work, and I would set them up. And then on the audience side, what I've learned, and this is kind of a key takeaway, is that if you want a large audience in the media, and especially in podcasting, there's only one way to do it. And that is produce good content over a long period of time regularly. That's it. There are no tricks. And so, we've been doing this for 13 years and our audience was very small. And it's grown and grown and grown until actually last month we did 1.5 million downloads. And so really it's an incremental process of getting the brand out to people and earning their trust.
And, as you, or let me just pause for a minute here, but the books that you are doing, are these interviews with authors, or are these like Audible where someone is reading out the book?
No, and I should also say that I'm a real audiobook fanatic. I listen to audiobooks every day. No, they are just the interviews with the authors. So essentially you have a new book on, again, Russian history, a host contacts you, the host reads the book, and then essentially they do an interview with the author that allows the author to tell people about the book.
Okay. And what are the genres that you work with? I mean, is it just
we have 104 different channels, and each channel is a subject.
Okay.
So 104 is probably not enough. So if you think about a university, it's divided into departments. We cover all those departments and fields. So philosophy and political science and sociology, South Asian studies, East Asian studies, gender, you name it, and we have a podcast about it.
Amazing. And one more question. I mean, if one of our many listeners wants to reach out to your network, what do they look for?
They can go to the New Books Network website, and there's a place to pitch your book. If you have a book, it's a form, you fill it out, and then it goes into a database that all of the hosts, all 450 of them, have access to. And they will look, and they will pick the books that they want to do. And then the host will reach out to the prospective guest.
Fascinating. When I was reading about you, and I'm going to quote what I was reading. Reading is hard and inconvenient. Listening is easy and convenient. My question to you is that over the last 13, 14 years that you've been running New Books Network, are you beginning to see a major shift taking place to audiobooks? And a follow-up question is that should authors be reading their own books?
As I said, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks for a lot of reasons. I could go deep here. Sometimes I've listened to, hundreds and hundreds of audiobooks. And it's really a kind of performance. It's a marvelous thing when you hear a book performed really well. And I have readers on audible.com where I get my books that I just enjoy. So if I see a book that I might not otherwise read, but I know that the person performing it is really good, I might listen to it anyway. Okay. Is there a shift? I think that it's really important to understand that reading is something that takes all of your attention. You can't do something else. And we're busy people. So listening, especially listening now that we have smartphones, it's just a very convenient way to reach people. Maybe they read the book after they hear the interview, maybe they don't, but they know about it and they might have learned something. I would like to see a lot more audiobooks, personally.
I've just finished listening to President Obama's book read by him. And, it was so fascinating. I've become a complete convert now, because imagine him talking directly into your ear. I mean, I thought that was fascinating. Cool. That was fascinating. So, tell me about, this is the age, Marshall, of the millennials and the Gen Zs. And one of the general complaints is that they're not reading enough. What is your view of the millennials and the Gen Zs reading and listening to books?
I don't know of any evidence that people are reading less. I'll just say I'm ignorant about that. I don't know. Okay. I do know, again, because we've done this for 13 years, 14 years now, that the audio format is now native to them. They don't think of a world in which podcasts didn't exist. They just exist. Yes. A little bit like we think of radio or TV. Like, when did it invent? I don't know when it was invented. It's just always been there. So what we find is that they're very comfortable with the format, with the technology and everything else. And I think that's very good. Because they don't have to think about all the technical problems that old guys like us have to think about.
Correct. It's natural for them. It's very natural.
Right. They are digital natives. And so for them, this is the natural thing to do. Listen to podcasts, audiobooks, things like that.
And do you get a lot of feedback from the 1.5 million downloads that take place in terms of what people are looking for? Or do they ask you, can you get so-and-so book on the platform?
No, not really. And I think the reason for that is people are just interested in the content.
Okay.
They are not interested in any sort of other engagement. They might want to go someplace and debate the books, but there are other places to do that. What they trust us to do is to provide a steady stream of good content over a long period of time regularly. And as long as we do that, I'm not going to hear from them. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous. So one more question for New Books Network before I move to the next section. For someone who's handling so many books and who's also interacting with millions of people in the audience, which means that you have the ability to communicate a very, very large amount of information, etc. What are some of the core values you believe in for NBN?
The core value, really the single core value for the New Books Network, is public education.
Okay.
That's really all we do. We just want to make what is in these books available to people all over the world. And I'm very proud to say that we do that. So about 70% of our downloads do come in Anglophonic countries, but we reach every country in the world. And in some places, I'll tell you what's interesting, is that I do hear from people in places in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. Because they can't get these books and they don't know about these, but they really want to know. And so, we serve a vital function for those people who are essentially deprived. So that's the core value, public education.
Okay. And is this available for people to download in India or not yet?
Oh yeah, no, it's available anywhere because the podcast app are international.
Okay.
So I looked at the geolocation chart the other day, and the only place we haven't been is North Korea, and I'm working on it.
Okay. And are you going beyond English language into other languages also?
That is my dream, really, because these language communities are underserved. I would love to have an NBN in Spanish or in Hindi or in Chinese or in German. And so really one of my dreams is that we will be able to provide this service to different language communities all over the world.
So offline, I will connect you to some interesting public
Okay, that would be great.
In Hindi, because it's a huge market in India.
It is an enormous market.
So, Marshall, let's now talk about Russia and your love for Russia. Of course, you like Russian history, but again, when I was reading, you argue that the Communist Party lost faith in the traditional path, autocratic leadership, command economy, control on public debate, state-engineered military. Help me understand this argument.
Well, they did lose faith in it, and so essentially they stopped pursuing the goal, which was socialism. I'm very glad they lost faith in it, because I don't think the command economy really serves people very well. And I would also say that in the case of Russia, they didn't lose faith in it enough. Because if they were like the Chinese, for example, they would have simply jettisoned the command economy and turned into a kind of autocratic capitalism. I'm not a fan of autocratic anything, but it's certainly better for consumers if people are allowed to compete, which you can see in the Chinese case. So had the Communist Party simply said, okay, we're not going to have a command economy, or you're going to compete and we'll help you, which is what the Chinese did, then I think Russia would be a very different place today.
Yeah, that's what some people used to say in the Gorbachev days, etc., that the political liberalization should have come after economic liberalization.
I think that's
what
right.
Chinese did.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I think that's exactly right. And essentially, they didn't go far enough. And it was because they were afraid they would lose power, which they lost power anyway. But it's kind of a double whammy. They both have autocracy, and now they're struggling to compete economically. Had they had a long period of maturation under Communist Party rule, as was the case in China, then they could fight about whether they wanted to be a liberal democracy, but eat really well. If you see what I mean.
I agree. But then, if you were to, as someone who understands Russia and communist Russia so well, what would you say the Chinese did differently? The second largest economy in the world.
Again, I don't know the Chinese case terribly well, but the one thing that they did do was open up the economy to competition and to foreign capital. And this could not have been done under Gorbachev or any Russian ruler. It wasn't possible for them, given their ideological commitments and everything else. I think also they were not too worried about the West. The Russians were always thinking about the West, always, and kind of for good reason, because twice in the last century, essentially Germany tried to destroy them with incredible consequences. The Chinese just didn't worry about it. I mean, they devoted their energy and time and resources to an economic program, whereas the Russians wouldn't give themselves that privilege.
Interesting. And as a Russian historian, what would you say is the benefit or the disadvantage of autocratic leadership, which still exists in Russia, but is beginning to come in several other countries as well?
I don't think there are any long-term benefits for autocratic, because the thing about autocratic leadership, it's not a self-correcting mechanism. I mean, say what you will about the United States government. I mean, it's kind of a mess sometimes, but it can correct itself and has many times. And that's because of we have a pretty stable party system. We have the rule of law, and we have a system of elections and voting rights that ensures that if somebody is not doing a good job, we can get rid of them. And so the mechanism corrects itself. Autocracies do not have that. So if they go off the rails, there's no force that can stop them.
Yeah. There's no inbuilt corrective mechanism available in the electorate.
That's exactly. I mean, in a way, it's analogous to, say, science. Science is also a self-correcting mechanism. If you're wrong, somebody will point it out, and you can correct yourself. So that's really what I think you want to shoot for in government and in knowledge production and these other things, is some mechanism that corrects itself. Autocracies can't do that.
Correct. Well said. So I'm going to move to the last segment of our conversation, which are some questions for you personally. Marshall, senior professor, teaching, became an entrepreneur, you said, had your own set of failures, and we'll talk a little bit about failure. What does success mean to you as you look at life, where you are today?
I think success means finding meaning, and I find meaning in helping other people. And that means, in our case, achieving our mission. So when I know that we are reaching people all over the world with this information, I feel very gratified about that. I'm not too concerned with the money. I just need enough. We have investors. I think they feel the same way. So in our case, I always tell people that are in business or want to go into businesses, you need to find a problem and become the solution to that problem. And that's essentially what we do. The problem is a lot of people don't get the information that they need. And so we just solve that problem for them. They pay us. That's fair. And that's good. Okay. So that's really what success is for me. I mean, I should also say I did this for 10 years and didn't make a dime.
Yeah.
But people would ask me during that time, is it a success? And I would say, yes, it is a success. We are achieving our mission.
Fantastic. And a follow-up question to that is that, you keep doing so many amazing things. Who or what inspires you?
I'm inspired by everybody who starts a business. I mean, this is just simply a kind of, it's remarkable, A, that you can do it. And it's remarkable, B, that you can do it successfully. I work with a lot of these investors and people I know who started business. And I just think it's an incredible thing to be able to do because, what is capitalism? It's a system where we compete with one another to do the most good. That seems hard to beat, and so I see these people who are entrepreneurs and I'm just like, wow, that's really a kind of amazing thing. They built that with a bunch of other people, of course, but I think that's the thing that inspires me, is that there are problems in the world, but we can fix them essentially by starting companies.
Fascinating. So my next question to you is on failure, and I'm talking now from my part of the world. Asian parents don't teach children it's okay to fail. We're always told you've got to be first, you've got to be right in front of the line, and it manifests itself in our behavior patterns. Yet we fail all the time, and I have a new book coming out on failure. My question to you, Marshall, is that what have been some of your learnings from some of your mistakes or failures?
Well, I would say the biggest challenge in my business life was not knowing what I needed to know and proceeding anyway. Okay. So I think that early on in the New Books Network, I kind of, being a professor, of course, I knew everything. I was not willing to reach out to people and get help. Yeah. But once I started to do that and I became comfortable to do that, essentially I became comfortable with phone conversations, because all serious business is done on the phone and not by email. Then I found people that said, oh, you have something very interesting. How can I help? And I said that was really the key, is when I started to understand that I just didn't know what I needed to know, but other people did, and they were public spirited enough to help me.
Very interesting. So I have time for two more questions for you now. My next question is, as someone who runs a New Books Network, what are you reading or listening to now? And what are
that's good you asked that. I just finished reading a book by Francis Spufford called Red Plenty. And this is the most unlikely book in the world, because it's essentially about the attempt of the Soviet economy under Khrushchev to reform the way it sets prices. This is a book about prices. But it's one of the best books I have ever read. It's absolutely fascinating and very sympathetic to what the Russians were trying to do. It's wonderfully written, and I would recommend it to anyone who wants to understand the Soviet Union after World War II. And I should say, it's a fiction book. The book is fiction.
Really?
But I think I can't say enough good things about this book.
Amazing. Fascinating. And my last question to you, and this is for the thousands of young individuals who listen to our conversation. What would your advice be to a young author who's starting off on their journey as an author?
I would say you simply have to want to do the work for itself. It kind of has to be art for art's sake. And this would also be true of somebody that's going to graduate school in the humanities, where there's no clear job when you're done. If you really love doing it, and you're young, say in your 20s, this is exactly the time to do it. If you're impassioned by it, just do it. Because you can live on ramen and sleep on a mattress on the floor in your 20s without a problem.
Correct.
So you can go ahead and devote yourself to this project. Eventually, the reality of reality will hit you in the face and you'll need a job. But in your younger years, we live in a pretty forgiving environment, and you don't need a lot. So now is the time to pursue your art. And I say do it.
Well said. Marshall, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I will certainly get you an introduction for you to come into India in Hindi.
Okay.
And I wish you lots of success yourself and for NBN. Thank you very much.
All right, Ashutosh. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. A platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.